Drawing nature with line, particularly with ink line, can be a really challenging and overwhelming experience because nature can have so much detail, so many lines. I find that with drawing natural scenes, such as this Australian bush scene, it's even more important to be aiming at drawing the effect of what we're seeing, not the actual objects, the actual detail itself. And I'll say I did have off camera a black and white version of this scene that I also used to reference, not so much at this point, but in the final stages of the drawing. It helped me get a better understanding of the values unaffected by colour. At this point, I'm really reserving spaces to not put lines in so that when I start to do a lot of the hatchwork in this, a lot of the hatching in this, that in fact I don't run into places that I really need the paper to come through or where I need any lines on it to be carefully positioned because they're going to be doing more than suggesting value, they're going to be suggesting shape or outline or silhouette. So I'm doing that at this point. You'll notice I draw the two tree trunks in with very broken lines, and it's partly because they don't have a straight line. The bark is very rough, and I want to be able to reflect that in my final rendering of these trees. And if I have smooth straight lines, it's going to be that much harder to do it. So I did use a 0.5mm pen for the trees and just for the very closest things. I've now switched to a 0.3, and I do switch to a 0.1 for the furthest things and for a lot of the furthest hatching, so that it still had a sense of being further back. Close hatching with a fine line ends up, I think, looking a bit lighter in value than close hatching with a heavy line. So I wanted to try and at least reserve the option of employing that in my technique. But at this point, I'm really establishing what's where, what trees, what trunks. Now, once I go beyond the more obvious closer trees and shrubs, I'm really not doing anything but suggesting the effect of what I see further back. I'm not trying to position all these trees that are right in the shadows further back accurately at all. This is where it is good to start to stand up, not to look closely, but to look at our scene from a bit farther away. And you can see just then, I've been trying to establish some of the darker values for those furthest parts in deepest shadow. And so I'm really doing that because I can't start to in a sense, play with the effects too much until I start to create some distinctions that I can read off. One thing you might be surprised is that I'm leaving the two closest tree trunks until the very last thing pretty much I draw. And that's because to do them now, I don't really know what will help them to stand out the best. They are very close, they are in shade. The trunks that we can see are mostly shaded, and yet they are very close, and on the grayscale they're quite light. And so while I need to put some sort of hatching on them, I don't want to be too heavy, and so I can't judge that. I can't judge what will in effect be lighter than what's behind until I've put what's behind in place. So the order in which we do, if you like, value work through cross-hatching is really important. Now, again, at this point, I'm switching pens a bit here. And again, it's getting a bit, I probably got a bit bogged down in trying to be a bit fussy with being faithful to the reference photo. So at this point now, I'm back to my 0.1. At this point, I'm just, trying to get the values happening between the larger tree trunks, and that closer one, if you like, the third most prominent tree trunk that we can see. Again, I'm not rushing to add hatching to that because I really want that one to stand out in a way that the other ones further back don't need to. So again, the order we do things is important. Again, I'm trying to reserve some paper to just have less lines on it to reflect these areas in bright light. So we're looking at a backlit scene of the Australian bush, and those shrubs that are in light, it's actually the light passing through the shrubs that we're seeing that's lighting them up, rather than the light being directly on them. So this is really, I mean, it's a challenging scene to draw anyway, but by being backlit makes it even more challenging. So it's even more important, therefore, the technique that we have, that it's one that lets us, if you like, establish the things we need to establish in creating the effect. So I'm trying to create effects of value and of edge. And so that's what I'm looking at. And at this point, I'm still, if you like, roughing in the work, roughing in the lines. I can't really start to, if you like, add the fine tuning for any part of it until I've got a lot more done. And you can see here now I'm doing my hatch lines horizontally on this tree trunk, because that will help it stand out from the other areas around, which are more, if not vertical lines, diagonal hatching lines that are more vertical than horizontal. So the direction of our lines can be important, and if you know my work, you know I do tend to favour vertical or lines more vertically than horizontal ones, but especially for trees and for tree branches, I think horizontal lines can work really well. They take longer, so it's tempting just to use vertical lines, but if it looks better, we need to put the time into it. Can I say this drawing took me 60 minutes, pretty much exactly, to do in real time. And if this is too fast for you and you'd like to see a little bit more, I'll add 2 minutes of real-time drawing to the end. But you can use that cog symbol on your YouTube page to slow down the video, and it really is probably worth doing if you want to see it in more detail. And generally, we can still understand the commentary when we slow it down. And because I tend to speak probably a bit too quickly anyway, it may actually work quite well to slow it down to half speed. Or else, as I said, you can watch a few minutes at the end and just see how it unfolds in real time. So I decided to really work a little bit more on the left-hand side and refine it a bit, which is what I've been doing then. And I don't feel the need so much to progress to that stage over the whole drawing yet. But I certainly will before I attempt to do those two trees that are closest. It's important at this point not to lose it and quickly hatch over areas with reserve. That is very frustrating, but not unknown. So I'm refining this center area a little bit now before I move on, because I think it really does establish enough. I'm feeling at this point there's too much that's still tonally or value-wise in the tonal work with the hatching too similar in large clumps. I feel like I need to refine some of the shapes into smaller shapes. Working in with this bush with light, I mean, it is fairly important, I think, that I get a sense of the light coming, even though it's backlit light, coming from the upper left down into the right, the lower right. And so this bush behind these two foreground trees is quite important to have a sense of light as well. So I'm doing my best there just to reserve some space and being particularly gestural now with these lines, these hatching lines for between the two trees. I'm feeling even less the need to actually represent exactly what's there, even in a general term. I'm taking a lot more liberty. And you just saw then I very quickly darkened that third tree as I was thinking of it as, because I wanted it to go back further. But I did leave a slim line of whiteness, or of more whiteness than other parts of the drawing, on each side of it to try and just preserve that a little bit more visually. So more of the same. And the important thing is to not lose track of what we're doing and become careless in our line work. it's actually reasonably late in the afternoon, and so this probably wasn't the best time of day to be drawing this. So I was feeling a little bit weary. With things like branches too, it's important to get whatever the underlying shape is of the branch, and not just to draw snakes moving outwards from a central point. So I now decide I need to start working on these trees, because I am getting quite close, and how these trees look will also depend on how I adjust other shapes as well. Now I use some vertical lines, not for hatching but to suggest the bark, and I'm using horizontal lines now to put the value for the shade on the back of the trees. And notice that I'm really quite deliberately not using equal lines, equal effect from them, because some parts of the tree bend towards or bend away or have a little more, in effect, overhang, and they attract shade differently to other parts of the trunk. So I'm wanting to allow for that in this. And I found for these two trees, this was probably the thing that it was most helpful to be able to see the black and white version of this scene for. It just helped me get a stronger sense of how light or dark should they be in relation to what's around them. And so I was quite happy with that effect, and I just now need to strengthen some of the details around the front here. And so now we are actually doing some final adjustments. I'm just trying to create a bit more variation in some of the larger values that are still a bit the same. Remember, it's the effect we're after. It as long as no single part has to look like anything, as long as the overall effect looks like the bushland receding backwards into a dark valley. We're creating the effect with our lines. We're not trying to create the exactness. And so now I actually just do the last little bit, which is evening up the edges. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you have a go drawing this. I'll post this photo on my channel community page. But whether you draw it or not, whatever you're drawing, make sure you have fun. But do have a go at drawing the effect, not the exactness. See you next time. Bye.